Scottsdale, Arizona. The city shimmered beneath a merciless afternoon sun, asphalt rippling with heat waves, air thick enough to taste. Officer Jack Monroe sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, silent and still, his gaze unfocused on the red light ahead. The world outside buzzed, drivers impatient, radios blaring, life pushing relentlessly forward. But for Jack, everything was muted, background static dulled by exhaustion and the ache of old memories he could never quite shut out. Then, out of nowhere, two German shepherd puppies burst into the street, streaking out from behind a battered newspaper box like ghosts set on fire. Horns blared, brakes screeched. Jack's pulse jolted him into action. He saw a flash of caramel and black fur, wide panicked eyes, paws scrabbling across burning pavement. He slammed his foot down, tires squealing, adrenaline slicing through the haze. His training, the instincts he thought he'd buried with Shadow, his old K9 partner, kicked in. Jack threw open his door, boots hitting the asphalt. Time slowed. The world shrank to the two tiny figures weaving through traffic, desperate and out of place. One puppy, bolder, darted ahead. Luna, though Jack didn't know her name yet. She lunged at his pant leg, her teeth barely grazing the fabric, then yanked urgently, as if to say, "Come now." Behind her, Remy trembled, shrinking from the chaos, his whole body taut with fear but refusing to leave his sister's side. Jack knelt, voice low and steady, hands open. "Easy. I got you. It's okay." The bolder pup stared straight into his eyes. For a heartbeat, Jack saw a raw plea, a hope deeper than hunger or fear. She pressed her nose to his wrist, whining, tail low but wagging just enough to beg for trust. A horn wailed, an angry driver swerving too close. Jack scooped the puppies up, their fur bristling, Luna's heart hammering against his palm. He rushed them to safety, back inside his cruiser. Only then did he realize the puppies weren't just running wild. They had purpose, an urgency that pressed at him even as they trembled in his lap. As the traffic light finally turned green, Jack caught his own reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he didn't see the stoic cop everyone in the precinct respected. He saw a man haunted, holding life in his arms that refused to let go. Luna, refusing to be ignored, tugged at his sleeve again, whimpering, her eyes never leaving his. Remy curled up against his chest, shivering. Jack's heart squeezed, the old ache threatening to crack his armor. He spoke, voice rough. "What is it? What do you want to show me?" She pressed harder, pawing at the door, desperate. Jack understood. There was something out there. Something urgent. He couldn't walk away, not this time. He set them down, let Luna lead. She bolted across the parking lot, glancing back to make sure he followed. Remy trailing anxiously in her shadow. They darted toward a patch of overgrown bushes lining a deserted dirt lot, their small bodies vanishing beneath tangled mesquite and brittle weeds. Jack hesitated, years of training warning him of hidden dangers, old wounds whispering for him to keep his distance. But the plea in their eyes was impossible to ignore. Jack followed, sweat slick on his brow, the sun a punishing weight on his back. The lot was a mess of thorns and trash, broken glass glittering like diamonds. Each step forward was an act of faith. Luna barked, sharp and insistent, as if cursing him for being too slow. As Jack ducked beneath a twisted branch, something shifted in the shadows. An uneasy silence, a heaviness in the air. His breath caught, a chill racing down his spine despite the heat. He called out softly, "It's okay, I'm here." Suddenly, Luna stopped, standing over something half-hidden by the underbrush. Remy whimpered, circling close, nose pressed to the ground. Jack's heart hammered. He knelt, pushing aside debris, bracing himself for what he might find. The world narrowed to this one moment. Jack reached out, hand trembling just enough to betray the fear he refused to admit. His fingers brushed fur, warm but far too thin, brittle and patchy. He heard a faint sound, a raspy breath, barely there. A mother German shepherd, Sierra, tethered to a rotting fence post, her body broken, eyes glazed but fiercely protective. Luna nuzzled her, whining. Remy pressed against her side. Jack felt the world tilt, grief rising up like a tidal wave. Memories of shadow, of loss, of all he'd tried to bury. In Sierra's collar he found a slip of paper. She tried. She did everything. The words hit him harder than a fist. Jack fought back tears, chest burning, as Luna and Remy clung to their mother, refusing to leave her side. The desert around them was silent except for the sound of their small, desperate hope. He looked at Sierra, skeletal, half alive, but meeting his gaze with a plea that was almost human. Not for herself, but for her pups. Why had these puppies risked everything to find him? What secret were they trying to reveal? Jack didn't have answers, only the certainty that everything was about to change. He radioed for help, voice barely steady, and stayed by their side until the wail of sirens broke the silence. For the first time in years, Jack Monroe let himself care, and knew he couldn't walk away. Jack Monroe crouched in the relentless Arizona heat, sweat running down the inside of his collar, his breath thick with the scent of sage and dust. The air in the scrub lot was sharp, filled with the hum of cicadas and the distant whine of traffic. Ordinary sounds, but nothing about this moment felt ordinary. He reached for Sierra, the battered mother German shepherd, his hands moving with the care of someone who knew what it meant to lose something you loved. Sierra's body was little more than bones and willpower. She flinched as Jack's fingers brushed her fur, her ribs sharp beneath his palm, her coat mottled with ticks and old scars. A frayed rope bit deep into the skin of her neck, tethering her to the fence post. She tried to lift her head, managed a faint growl, a warning, a promise, and then let it go, exhaustion overwhelming instinct. Remy and Luna, the two puppies, pressed against her, whining and licking her face. The look Sierra gave them was pure, painful devotion. Even in her agony, she was their shield. Jack felt the burn of old memories, the way Shadow had once watched him with that same fierce, selfless loyalty. The ache of that loss pulsed in his chest. He cleared his throat, forcing down the surge of feeling that threatened to shake him apart. He saw the faded collar around Sierra's neck, its tag long lost. With gentle fingers, he slid out a small, folded slip of paper stuck under the leather. The writing was scrawled, desperate. She tried. She did everything. The message was brief, but it carved itself into Jack's thoughts, raising more questions than answers. Who had abandoned her? Who'd left her here to die? Was it guilt that made them leave the note, or cowardice? For a moment, all Jack could do was kneel in the dirt, the dry wind pressing against his back. He didn't let himself cry. He hadn't cried, not really since Shadow. Instead, he moved to action, voice steady but gentler than he'd used in years. Hang in there, girl. I've got you. You're not alone anymore. He stroked her head, careful not to touch the worst wounds, and called in his location to dispatch. Minutes blurred. He knelt by Sierra's side, murmuring reassurances he wasn't sure she understood. Luna nuzzled her mother's muzzle, refusing to leave while Remy kept glancing from Jack to the road, as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. Help arrived in the form of a battered animal control van, its paint faded and logo half peeled away. Two techs stepped out. Janine, a woman Jack had seen at more than one late-night rescue, and Marco, whose hands shook as he took in the scene. The air in the lot shifted, charged with the weight of what they'd found. They worked quickly, but gently, untangling the rope and slipping a soft muzzle over Sierra's snout. Janine knelt beside Jack. "She's a fighter. It's a miracle she made it this far," she whispered, voice hoarse. "We'll do what we can." They lifted Sierra onto a stretcher, her body limp, paws twitching weakly. Remy and Luna whined and tried to jump onto the gurney. Jack knelt and gathered them in his arms, feeling the rapid thump of their hearts. The heat of their small, desperate bodies pressed against him. As the team loaded Sierra into the van, Jack glanced at the old collar, thumb tracing the groove where the note had been. Shadows flickered at the edge of his mind. Flashes of shadows last night. The helplessness. The guilt. Jack shook it off. This wasn't the past. He wouldn't let it become another ghost. Janine's voice cut through his thoughts. "Ride with us. They'll need you. She'll need you." There was no question in her tone. Jack nodded, sliding into the passenger seat with Remy and Luna huddled in his lap, their small bodies clinging to him like lifelines. The drive to the shelter was silent, but for the sound of anxious puppy breaths. Jack kept one hand on Remy's back, the other cradling Luna against his chest. Outside, Scottsdale drifted by. Strip malls and desert brush, the gold-red glow of late sun fading behind low hills. At the shelter, the world moved with the efficiency of practiced emergency. Sierra was rushed inside, laid gently on a stainless steel table as a vet and two techs swooped in. Jack stayed just outside the treatment room, clutching Remy and Luna, forced to watch through the glass. He could see every rib on Sierra's body, the ugly swell of old wounds, the ragged scars that told a story of suffering long before today. The puppies cried for their mother, pawing at the door. Jack's throat tightened. He remembered standing on the other side of another door, watching helpless as Shadow's life slipped away, the guilt and rage and sorrow mixing into something that felt like poison. A hand on his shoulder startled him. Marco holding out a cup of water. "You did good, Monroe. She might have a shot now. That counts for something." Jack nodded but didn't trust himself to speak. He watched as the vet injected fluids into Sierra's veins, murmuring to her, checking her pulse. Minutes felt like hours. Luna curled up in his lap, finally exhausted enough to sleep, while Remy lay beside him, eyes fixed on the treatment room, silent but wide awake. At last the vet emerged, face drawn but hopeful. "She's got a long road ahead. Severe malnutrition, tick fever, old injuries. She's been through hell, but she's fighting. The puppies, if you hadn't found them, brought them, she might not have made it through the day." Jack nodded, his voice raw. "What happens now?" "We do everything we can, but she's not out of the woods, not by a long shot." As the sun set, painting the shelter windows with streaks of gold and shadow, Jack watched Sierra from across the room, Remy and Luna pressed to his sides. The question echoed in his mind, "Who did this to you? Can you survive, Sierra? Or will I lose you too?" The world outside kept turning, but in this room everything was suspended. Grief, hope, guilt, and the faint, fragile thread of possibility. Jack Monroe sat slumped in a hard plastic chair just inside the shelter's fluorescent-lit lobby, his uniform shirt damp at the collar, heart still beating too fast. The adrenaline of the rescue had faded, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. He kept Remy and Luna tucked in close. Luna pressed against his ribs. Remy curled between his boots. While through the glass, he watched Sierra's motionless body on the vet table. Time stretched, thick and shapeless, every minute echoing with the faint beep of monitors and the whispered shuffle of shelter staff. The chaos outside, the roar of Scottsdale's evening traffic, the city's relentless movement, felt a world away. Here, everything was about waiting. Jack had seen too many scenes like this. Tense, anxious, hope fighting with dread. But never from this side of the glass. Never since Shadow. He kept his breathing steady, but his hand trembled as he stroked Remy's back, felt the tiny heartbeat thumping out fear and longing. Every so often, Luna whimpered, eyes fixed on the closed door where their mother was fighting for her life. He tried to distract them. Jack dug into his vest for a granola bar, his own dinner, meant to be wolfed down in the car between calls. He peeled it, broke off a piece, and offered it to Remy. The puppy sniffed, licked, then turned away, gaze still glued to the treatment room. Luna didn't even lift her head. Jack felt a painful kinship with their refusal. He'd lost his appetite, too. Through the glass, Jack saw Janine and Marco working beside the vet. They gently sponged Sierra's wounds, started IV fluids, clipped away the worst of her matted fur. The vet murmured as she worked, her hands steady even as Sierra's pulse fluttered in her neck. It was clear the dog had survived far more than any animal should be asked to endure. Jack's mind wandered, memories crowding in. Late nights alone in his old apartment. The empty click of Shadow's claws missing from the floors. The ache of silence that felt like punishment. He wondered what it was about dogs that made him feel everything so much sharper, so much more exposed. Maybe it was the trust in their eyes, the way they gave everything even when the world gave nothing back. Eventually, Janine slipped out into the lobby, her scrubs stained and hair askew. She crouched beside Jack, her voice gentle. She's holding on. It's going to be touch and go tonight. She glanced at the puppies. They're not going to want to leave her. Neither will you, I guess. Jack managed a tired smile. I'll stay as long as I'm allowed. Janine nodded. That's good. They know you saved them. She reached over to ruffle Luna's ear, then stood and hurried back to the treatment room, leaving Jack alone again with his thoughts and the heavy, hopeful silence. As the evening wore on, the shelter's lobby emptied out. The summer light faded from gold to dusty rose, then to the deep blue of desert night. Remy shifted uneasily, nose twitching, while Luna at last crawled into Jack's lap, her small body finally relaxing, sighing into the comfort of his arms. Jack realized he hadn't held a dog like this in years. The simple, fragile weight of Luna was more powerful than any therapy session, more honest than any confession. He looked down at Remy. You're safe now, Jack whispered, voice hoarse. She's safe too. Or she will be. I promise. He didn't know why he said it. Promises were dangerous, heavy things. But in that moment, he meant it with all his heart. A tech poked her head out of the treatment room, signaling Jack forward. He stood, his legs stiff, and approached the glass. Sierra was wrapped in blankets, a line running from her paw to a hanging bag of fluid. The vet looked up, eyes weary but kind. She made it through the worst of the shock. We found old injuries, broken ribs that never healed right. Whoever had her, it was a long time before anyone cared. Jack felt anger flare, a flash of heat in his chest. But there was nothing to do with it but stand and watch as Sierra fought to breathe. The rise and fall of her chest, shallow but determined. Janine came to stand beside him. "You did the right thing, Jack. We'll give her every chance." He nodded, words stuck in his throat. Through the glass, Luna whimpered and pawed at the door, desperate for her mother. Jack crouched beside her, murmuring softly, telling the puppies bits of his own story, about shadow, about the way grief lingered like an ache in old bones, about how hard it was to let anyone in. Hours slipped by. Staff came and went, the lights dimmed, and the shelter grew quiet. Still, Jack remained, anchored by two trembling puppies who refused to leave, and by the battered mother who needed more than medicine to survive. At midnight, Janine brought him a blanket and a cup of coffee that tasted like burned hope. Jack smiled his thanks. He sat on the cold tile, Remy and Luna huddled close, their bodies finally giving in to sleep. In the silence, he listened to their breaths, the soft sounds of life, and the distant, ever-present hum of Scottsdale outside. A question gnawed at him. Would Sierra survive the night? And if she did, could he allow himself to care again, to open his heart, knowing how easily it could be broken? He didn't know. But for now, Jack Monroe, the man who'd pushed everyone away, held tight to the puppies and waited for dawn. Days blurred into each other, strung together by the rituals of worry and hope. Every morning before his shift, and every night after, Jack found himself driving back to the shelter, no matter how late or tired he was. The lobby staff learned to expect him, the quiet cop with the haunted eyes, always arriving with a bag of takeout coffee and, if he'd thought ahead, something for the volunteers as well. The dogs came to know his scent, especially Remy and Luna, who would leap up the second they heard his voice. The shelter was always half lit in the early hours, all the world's unwanted animals sleeping behind glass, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and longing. Jack moved quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace, his badge forgotten in his pocket, his uniform hanging on him like an old regret. He didn't know what exactly kept drawing him back. Was it the puppy's silent vigil, or the battered mother dog still fighting for her life on the other side of the recovery room glass? Or maybe it was the way his own heart kept pounding, quietly, with each day Sierra survived. Some nights, Sierra seemed unchanged, her breathing thin, her eyes glazed. Jack would sit in the visitor's chair, Remy pacing anxiously at his feet while Luna pressed herself into his lap, determined to make a pillow of his chest. In those small hours, he found himself talking, not out loud at first, just in his head. But slowly, the words slipped out, floating in the stillness. "I lost someone too once," he would murmur to Sierra, unsure if she could hear but needing to say it anyway. "My partner. He was a good dog. The best. But sometimes life doesn't care if you're good." He'd stare at his hands, at the old scars on his knuckles. "I never forgave myself. I guess I stopped believing I deserved another chance." Luna's soft breaths steadied him. Remy, too shy to be comforted, would circle the room and then finally settle, his eyes never straying far from Jack's boots. It struck Jack how much these puppies needed him, how much he needed them. Each day brought small changes. Sierra's ears would flick at the sound of her pups. Her tail would thump faintly against the blanket. A tech would announce quietly that she'd eaten a few bites or managed to stand, even if only for a second. Every victory felt enormous, and every setback, a new fever, a bout of trembling, the threat of infection, felt like it might break him, He grew close with the shelter staff. They relied on him, not just to soothe the puppies, but to sit through the long, silent hours. Janine began scheduling her rounds to overlap with his visits. Marco brought extra blankets, and once a battered radio that only played static and country ballads. Jack never said much, but the way he stayed spoke louder than any words. Sometimes he brought stories, told in soft, halting sentences, about the desert when the monsoon comes, about the memory of Shadow chasing tennis balls under the city lights. He was stubborn, Jack would say, smiling, but loyal, wouldn't quit on anyone. Luna would tilt her head, as if understanding, while Remy pressed closer, his eyes reflecting 1,000 unspoken fears. But there were moments when Jack almost broke. One morning, he arrived to find Sierra struggling, her body shaking with the effort to breathe. The vet worked quickly, adjusting her meds, but the fear was raw, immediate. Jack felt the old panic rising, the sense that no matter what he did, he'd lose her too. He squeezed Luna close, burying his face in her fur, ashamed at the tears that threatened. That night, Sierra's condition stabilized. Jack sat on the cold tile floor, back pressed to the wall, Luna and Remy on either side. The shelter lights flickered. Outside, a summer storm hammered the windows. For the first time, Jack let himself truly grieve, not just for Shadow, but for all the things he'd locked away. The partners lost, the friends who'd drifted, the family he'd kept at a distance. He whispered to Sierra, his voice thick with exhaustion. "If you want to go, I'll let you, but if you stay, I'll stay too, for as long as you need." He didn't know if the battered dog heard him, but Remy nudged his hand, and Luna rested her chin on his knee, their small warmth steadying him in the darkness. Days passed, and a routine set in. Jack would bring breakfast burritos for the staff, then spend hours coaxing Luna to eat, Remy to play. He learned to read their moods, the way Luna barked with excitement when the techs arrived, the way Remy froze at sudden noises. He watched as the two puppies began to relax, wrestling playfully in the quiet hours, inching closer to trust. The staff started calling him the dog whisperer. Janine joked that maybe he should just take the puppies home, give them what they needed. Jack always laughed it off, but the idea lingered. Was he strong enough to risk his heart again? Could he really open up after years of walls built out of sorrow? Through it all, Sierra fought. Some mornings she would be alert, ears pricked, licking her pups' faces when they were allowed in to see her. Other days, she barely stirred, eyes clouded with pain. But every small improvement gave Jack hope, and with every day he spent in the shelter, his old wounds began to itch, to heal. He realized slowly how much he needed this, how much he'd needed a reason to care again. The pain was still there, but it was different now, colored by hope and the possibility of something new. The shelter became his sanctuary, the dogs his family in all but name. And always the question loomed, would Sierra make it? Was Jack strong enough to be what these dogs needed? A guardian, a home, a second chance. For the first time in years, he let himself believe the answer could be yes. The night Sierra opened her eyes changed everything. Jack had been sitting in his usual spot on the cold tile floor, the familiar ache in his knees masked by the weight of Remy sprawled across his lap, and Luna curled close to his side. He was telling them another story, one about Shadow, the way that old dog would always nudge open Jack's bedroom door when the nightmares came. His voice was quiet, the hour late. The shelter's fluorescent lights turned low. The world outside was silent, but inside something shifted. Sierra stirred, a faint sound, more breath than bark. Jack looked up and froze. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling, and for the first time in days, those deep amber eyes opened wide, searching, uncertain. She tried to lift her head, the effort costing her more than Jack wanted to admit. But the moment she saw her puppies, her family, something changed. Remy and Luna, sensing their mother's return to the world, erupted with desperate joy. They scrambled from Jack's arms, pushing their snouts into the gap beneath the kennel gate, yipping and whimpering as if to summon her back from the edge. Jack felt the breath catch in his throat, old wounds and fresh hope tangling inside him. He watched as Sierra strained, her body shaking, front paws dragging across the bedding until she was pressed against the bars, muzzle nuzzling through to her puppies. Remy licked her feverishly, Luna yipping, tail thumping wildly. The reunion was raw, pure emotion, no words. Jack could only watch, blinking hard as his vision blurred. Behind him, Janine entered, drawn by the commotion. She gasped softly at the sight. "She's awake. She made it," she whispered, her own eyes bright with tears. The vet, who'd been hovering by the desk, rushed over, checking vitals, speaking in the soft, careful tone reserved for the most fragile cases. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she cautioned, but even she couldn't hide her smile. "This is a very good sign." Sierra tried to stand, driven by instinct and love, but her hind legs buckled and she collapsed, panting, eyes locked on her pups. She looked up at Jack, really looked at him, as if searching for something he hadn't known he could offer. For a moment, Jack felt as though she was asking him directly, "Please, help me try." He knelt beside the kennel, resting his hand just above the latch, careful not to startle her. "I see you, girl. I see you trying." His voice trembled, stripped bare of all the armor he'd built since Shadow's death. For the first time, he didn't try to hide it. As the night wore on, Sierra's strength ebbed and returned in cycles. Sometimes she seemed almost herself, her eyes bright, tail twitching, hungry for the scent of her family. Other times, exhaustion threatened to pull her under. The vet warned Jack that her organs were still weak, her survival anything but certain. Every moment was a risk, every small victory tinged with fear. Jack didn't leave. He sat through the long hours, holding the puppies when they cried, coaxing them to eat with bits of scrambled egg and pieces of rotisserie chicken smuggled in from the late-night diner down the street. He found himself talking to Sierra, telling her stories not just about Shadow, but about the city, the desert rain, the way the air smelled after a storm. Sometimes he spoke about loneliness, the kind that carves holes you don't know how to fill. He didn't know if she understood, but the act of speaking, of being seen, felt like medicine. One evening, as dawn edged across the horizon, the vet found Jack still sitting with the dogs. She studied him a moment, then knelt down beside him, her tone gentle but firm. "Jack, Sierra needs time. She needs hope. But right now, what those puppies need most is stability. A home, somewhere safe to heal, to grow." She met his eyes, challenging him and comforting him at the same time. "Would you foster them? Just for a while, until Sierra's strong enough?" Jack's first instinct was to refuse. The risk of love, of hope, felt too dangerous. He'd lost too much already, and the idea of bringing more loss under his roof made his pulse hammer with anxiety. But he saw the way Remy and Luna pressed against him, how their panic eased when his hand rested on their backs. He saw the hope in Sierra's eyes, the trust that had begun to bloom, fragile but real. Jack took a shaky breath. "I'll do it. For them. For her." His voice cracked. but he didn't look away. And maybe, for me too. Janine clapped him on the back, a rare smile breaking through. You're doing the right thing, Jack. Sometimes the only way to heal is to try again. That night, the shelter staff helped pack up Remy and Luna's belongings. A battered blanket, a couple of squeaky toys, the tiny harnesses with their names inked in careful script. Jack loaded them into his truck, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. He glanced back at the kennel where Sierra watched, her eyes following every move. He knelt down one last time before leaving. Hang on, girl. I'll bring them back. You fight. We'll wait for you. Sierra nuzzled his hand through the bars, her touch warm, her gaze determined. Jack left the shelter, the first rays of sunrise casting long, golden shadows. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope that love could be worth the risk, and that even the deepest wounds could find the light again. Jack Monroe drove through the sleeping streets of Scottsdale with the windows rolled halfway down, the night air dry and electric. In the back seat, Remy and Luna were huddled together in the crate the shelter staff had lent him, Luna's head resting protectively over her brother's, Remy's eyes wide and searching with each bump in the road. The empty leash that once belonged to Shadow lay coiled on the dashboard, silent as a memory. Jack's house had been quiet for years. It stood on the edge of a modest neighborhood, a single story with desert brush out front, a sagging porch swing, and wind chimes that sang mournful songs in the nighttime breeze. He'd left a light on in the living room, half out of habit, half out of hope. As he parked in the driveway, the two puppies looked up, uncertain, their world reduced to the soft creak of the crate door and the sound of Jack's calm, steady voice. Inside, the house seemed to inhale, sensing change. The smell of dog, old, fading, but never fully gone, still clung to the corners. Shadow's bed lay untouched by the couch. There was a worn patch in the entryway where paws had once danced in excitement. Jack set the crate down, knelt, and let Remy and Luna stumble out onto the cool tile. They hesitated, pressing into his legs before Luna, ever bold, took the lead. She sniffed every inch of the room, tail high, as if mapping the territory for both of them. Remy trailed cautiously, his nails clicking with every tentative step. The first night was chaos wrapped in quiet. Luna darted from room to room, investigating shoes, nosing through laundry, knocking over a photo frame that had been untouched for years. Remy whined softly at the door, listening for Sierra, his small body quivering with homesickness. Jack tried to settle them, unfolding a fresh blanket near Shadow's old bed, sprinkling treats, whispering reassurances in the gentle voice he'd all but forgotten how to use. Sleep came in fits and starts. Jack lay on the couch, feet dangling off the end, listening to the gentle padding of puppy paws, the soft, restless sounds of adjustment. Around midnight, Luna leapt up and curled next to Jack's boots, her chin draped across his ankle as if anchoring herself to something solid. Remy, after a long bout of pacing and tiny cries, finally crawled up beside Jack, his head finding a home on Jack's knee. Jack's breath hitched at the contact, the way their small, vulnerable bodies trusted him, the way they filled the empty places he'd stopped acknowledging. All night, Jack's mind chased old ghosts. He saw Shadow everywhere, the imprint in the bed, the chew toy half buried beneath the couch, the empty food bowl lined up by the back door. He heard echoes of a bark, the phantom scrape of claws, but as he drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, those memories blended with the new sounds, the puppies' sighs, the warm hum of their breaths. Loss and hope, grief and possibility, tangled together until dawn. Morning sunlight crept across the living room, catching dust motes and drawing golden lines across the tile. Remy woke first, nosing Jack's hand, then barking, a high, uncertain sound. Luna joined in, and suddenly the house was alive with energy Jack hadn't felt in years. He laughed, rubbing his face, realizing how strange and wonderful it felt to wake up not to silence but to joyful chaos. Breakfast was a learning curve for everyone. Remy refused to eat unless Jack sat on the floor beside him, gently coaxing him with bits of food. Luna snatched her portion, then darted back and forth as if worried someone would take it away. Jack found himself narrating everything he did, his voice filling the space. "Easy, girl. Slow down, Remy. You're safe here." The words felt clumsy but healing. As the day unfolded, Jack took the puppies into the backyard, a patchwork of sun-bleached grass and rocky dirt. Luna bolted out the door, her tail a black flag, circling the yard with the boundless energy of someone discovering freedom. Remy was more cautious, inching forward step by step, nose pressed to the ground, ears twitching at every new sound. Jack watched them play, laughter rising in his chest, unexpected, rough at first, then real. He found an old tennis ball, the fuzz nearly worn away, and tossed it across the yard. Luna gave chase, skidding in the dust, pouncing with gleeful abandon. Remy watched, then, after a hesitant pause, ran after her, yipping, his legs still unsteady but determined. Something shifted in Jack that morning. He felt the ache of old wounds, yes, but also a dangerous, hopeful warmth growing inside. For so long, his house had been a museum of grief, each room a shrine to what he'd lost. Now, with Remy and Luna, the silence was broken, replaced by the music of puppy paws, by the laughter that had been buried beneath years of sorrow. That afternoon, Jack sat on the porch, Remy dozing in his lap, Luna sprawled at his feet. He looked out at the street, the world moving quietly by. For a moment, he wondered if he'd done the right thing, if he was strong enough to risk another heartbreak. But when Luna lifted her head, eyes bright, and Remy sighed contentedly against his chest, Jack knew there was no turning back. Inside, the house felt alive again. Each room carried the ghosts of yesterday, but also the promise of tomorrow, a future shaped not by what he'd lost, but by the love and chaos he was willing to let back in. Word travels differently in a small community, faster, deeper, carried not just by phones and headlines, but by the pulse of shared concern. Within days, Jack Monroe's quiet act of rescue had grown into something larger, rippling out from the shelter's sterile halls into front yards and coffee shops, carried on the voices of neighbors who had once only nodded politely in passing. It started with a single story. Janine, unable to contain her pride, posted a photo online. Jack kneeling in the shelter, Remy and Luna pressed close, Sierra's fragile face resting against the bars, her eyes fixed on her puppies. The caption was simple. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just never stop trying. But the emotion it sparked was immediate and electric. The post was shared, then reshared, until the comment section overflowed with prayers, outrage, and promises of help. Jack never saw the post until a coworker texted him a link. His first reaction was to bristle. He'd built his life around privacy, his grief protected by routine and silence. Now, strangers knew his story, knew his pain, his tentative steps toward healing. But something else happened too. His front porch started filling up with gifts. On a Tuesday morning, Jack opened his door to find a bag of high-end puppy food, a hand-sewn blanket, and a note written in a shaky, elderly hand. Thank you for not turning away. By Wednesday, there were toys. Plush squirrels, rubber bones, tennis balls new and old. Someone left a dozen cans of dog food stacked neatly on the doormat. Jack shook his head in wonder, a slow, reluctant smile tugging at his mouth. The kindness was overwhelming, and at times, uncomfortable. Jack struggled to accept it. He had spent so many years offering help, not receiving it. But he forced himself to say thank you, sometimes in person, mostly through hurried notes taped to the mailbox. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. For the first time, he sensed the edges of a community he hadn't realized was still there. The puppies, blissfully unaware of the fuss, settled into their new routines. Luna's boldness grew by the day. She'd charge at the mailman, tail wagging like a flag, then circle back to check on Remy, whose caution was slowly melting in the warmth of his new home. Their playful wrestling matches filled the house with noise, their clumsy chases overturning water bowls and sending slippers skidding across the floor. Jack's laughter grew louder, more frequent, until it surprised even him. The shelter called with updates, voices tinged with cautious optimism. Sierra's recovery was slow but steady. She was eating, standing, and every day her eyes grew brighter. When Jack brought Remy and Luna by for visits, the reunion would shake the whole ward. Sierra's tail wagging in wide, slow arcs, her pups yipping and nuzzling, the staff watching with tears and grins. The bond between the three was unbreakable, and their joy was contagious. Nurses who'd seen the worst found themselves lingering by Sierra's kennel, drawn by hope. One afternoon, a knock at Jack's door brought a new kind of surprise. A local journalist, notebook in hand, nervously clutching a tape recorder. She was young, earnest, and determined to get the story. Jack hesitated, instinctively guarded, but her gentle questions and sincere curiosity wore him down. Sitting on the porch, Remy and Luna curled beside him. He spoke quietly about finding the puppies, about Sierra's fight, about Shadow, and all the years of silence that had nearly drowned him. The article ran under the headline, "Second Chances, How a Cop, Two Pups, and a Mother Dog Are Changing Scottsdale." The response was immediate. More donations to the shelter, offers to foster, to volunteer, to help. Strangers stopped Jack on his evening walks, offering encouragement, sharing their own stories of loss and healing. Some just smiled and nodded, but their warmth was unmistakable. Still, Jack's old defenses sometimes crept up. He wasn't used to attention, to gratitude. The spotlight made him itch, but each time he saw Remy and Luna wrestling in the yard, or Sierra's recovery chart posted with another small triumph, he was reminded that letting people in, letting them help, was part of the rescue too. One night, he found a letter taped to his door. "You reminded us to care. Thank you." It was unsigned, the handwriting blocky and determined. Jack kept it on the fridge. The puppies continued to grow, their personalities blooming. Remy invented new games with Shadow's forgotten toys. His favorite, a squeaky stuffed fox he guarded like treasure. Luna greeted every neighbor who stopped by, winning hearts with her bold leaps and goofy grin. Jack took pride in their progress, the way the house had shifted from a place of silence to a place of life. Shelter staff called one evening with the best news yet. Sierra was nearly strong enough for a full reunion. "She's ready," Janine said, her voice tight with joy. "She's waiting for her family." Jack hung up the phone and sat in the quiet, the puppies snoring at his feet. The weight of what he'd gained pressed on him, not as a burden, but as a promise. Soon, they would all be together again. Soon, the story that had begun with fear and loneliness would find its answer in the most unlikely place. A house reborn, a family remade. The morning of the reunion dawned impossibly bright. Sunlight pouring over the city and casting a golden haze on the desert brush outside Jack's window. He woke early, nerves twisted tight, the puppies sensing his energy. Luna was the first to catch on. She bounced around his legs, yipping with excitement, while Remy trailed close, eyes wide with anticipation, tail wagging in cautious hope. Jack stood in the kitchen, hands cradling a mug of coffee he never drank, his mind replaying the journey that had brought them here. A desperate dash through traffic, a mother's struggle for survival, nights on the shelter floor whispering promises to dogs who couldn't answer but somehow understood. He double-checked the crate in the back seat, loaded a blanket that smelled of home, and coaxed Remy and Luna into the truck. They rode quietly at first, watching the world whip by until Luna pressed her nose to the window and let out a sharp, joyful bark. Jack smiled, a rare, unguarded thing, then turned the key and pulled out, his heart beating faster with every mile. The shelter looked different in daylight, as if the walls themselves recognized the importance of this morning. Janine greeted them at the door, her smile wide, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and maybe a few tears. "She's waiting," she whispered, voice trembling. Remy and Luna needed no encouragement. They pulled Jack down the hallway, their paws slipping on the polished tile, yips echoing through the corridors. As they approached the recovery ward, the room filled with a chorus of happy chaos. Other dogs barking, staff gathering, a few neighbors who had followed the story standing just outside the glass. Jack saw Sierra the moment he turned the corner. She was thin, her body marked by scars that would never quite fade. But she stood, legs shaking only a little, eyes brighter than he had ever seen. Her ears pricked forward at the first sound of her puppy's nails against the tile, and she surged forward, tail wagging, every inch of her alive with longing. Remy and Luna tore across the room, voices raised in a song only dogs could understand. Sierra met them halfway, her head low, tail whirling, nose pressed urgently against each of her pups. For a moment, the world shrank to just the three of them, a tangle of fur and whimpers and joy. Sierra licked their faces, pawed them close, her whole body vibrating with relief. Jack couldn't move. He watched, transfixed, as the family reunited. Something inside him broke and healed at the same time. A dam of sorrow, guilt, and longing giving way to something softer, something almost like peace. The staff watched with tears in their eyes. A few neighbors clapped quietly, one wiping her cheeks with the hem of her sleeve. Janine nudged Jack. "They needed you," she said, voice full of wonder. "But maybe you needed them even more." Jack just nodded, unable to speak. The sounds in the room, soft cries, happy barks, Sierra's heavy, contented sigh, were all the language he needed. After the initial rush, Jack knelt down, letting Remy and Luna return to him. They darted back and forth between Sierra and Jack, unsure who needed comfort more. Sierra approached Jack, slowly, eyes questioning. He held out his hand, palm open. She sniffed, then pressed her head into his chest, accepting him at last. Jack wrapped his arms around her, his voice caught in his throat. "You made it, girl. You really made it." The shelter director approached, a gentle smile on his face. "Jack, we've all seen what you've done, how you fought for them, for all of you. We'd like to ask, would you consider adopting the whole family? Sierra, Remy, Luna. They need to stay together, and we believe you're the one to do it." The question hung in the air, heavy and dazzling. Jack felt the eyes of everyone in the room on him, not judging, but hoping, rooting for something good in a world that so often delivered pain. His first reaction was a flood of doubt. Was he ready? Could he risk his heart again, knowing how fragile life could be? But then Sierra pressed closer. Remy nudged his hand. Luna curled up against his knee. Jack remembered all those nights of silence, the years he'd hidden from the world and from himself. The truth was, these dogs hadn't just needed rescue, they'd rescued him too. He looked at Janine, at the director, at the circle of neighbors who'd shown up for this moment. He looked at the family that had chosen him in their darkest hour. And then, slowly, Jack nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks unchecked. "I'd be honored," he said, voice rough but steady. "They're already my family." The room broke into applause, quiet and sincere. The shelter staff hugged each other. A neighbor snapped a photo that would soon circle the community again, a testament to hope and healing. That night, Jack brought Sierra, Remy, and Luna home. No more temporary beds, no more uncertainty. The house glowed with new life, every room echoing with laughter, the click of paws, the easy rhythm of a family remade. Jack sat on the porch as dusk fell, Sierra at his side, Remy and Luna chasing each other in wild loops across the yard. He watched the stars blink to life, listened to the chorus of crickets, and understood that this messy, beautiful, fragile joy was what he'd been missing all along. For the first time in years, Jack Monroe felt whole. And for the first time, he looked at tomorrow, not with dread, but with hope. Jack Monroe never imagined how quickly his house could transform, or how deeply. Within days of bringing Sierra, Remy, and Luna home for good, the rooms that once echoed with emptiness were filled with new life and chaotic routine. There were muddy paw prints tracked across the tile, tufts of fur gathering in corners, and toys scattered like confetti from the kitchen to the bedroom. Yet every mess, every burst of noisy play, every clumsy puppy stumble was a marker of healing, a sign that something sacred was taking root where grief had long been king. Jack threw himself into their care with a devotion that surprised even him. He set up vet visits, scheduled baths, learned about puppy training classes, and scoured forums for advice about easing Sierra's lingering pain. Sierra, older and wiser, watched over Remy and Luna with the patient tenderness of a survivor who'd nearly lost everything. She would nap in the patch of sunlight by the back door, sometimes lifting her head to follow Jack's movements, her eyes full of trust she hadn't shown anyone before. Remy blossomed in ways Jack had never expected. The once timid puppy now invented games with Shadow's old toys, tug-of-war with a faded rope, hide-and-seek behind the armchair. He learned to bark for attention, to whine for cuddles, and to wrestle Luna to the ground in the afternoons. Remy even made friends with the neighbor's senior retriever, cautiously sharing a bowl of water on summer mornings. The house, once so silent, now thrummed with new connections. Luna, ever the explorer, staked her claim as the house's guardian. She greeted every visitor at the door, tail wagging, eyes bright. She followed Jack from room to room, as if determined to prove her loyalty by never letting him out of her sight. Sometimes, when Jack worked late into the night at his kitchen table, Luna would rest her head on his knee and doze, anchoring him to the present. The community, too, continued to respond. Neighbors dropped by with treats and offers to walk the dogs. Children from down the block asked to play fetch in Jack's yard, their laughter blending with the happy barking of the pups. Older residents brought stories about dogs they'd loved and lost, about times the neighborhood had felt less kind. There were moments, sitting on the porch with Sierra stretched out beside him, when Jack understood that what he was building was bigger than a family. He was building trust. He was building hope for himself and for the people around him. Every day, Jack found himself reflecting on his journey, the long, lonely years, the pain of losing Shadow, the way he'd closed himself off in the mistaken belief that grief was safer than hope. He noticed the subtle changes in himself, how he slept through the night more often, how he found himself laughing aloud at Luna's antics, how he'd started calling old friends, and even inviting them over for coffee. Grief hadn't left him. It never would. But it no longer ran the show. Caring for Sierra and the puppies was teaching him that wounds might never vanish, but they could coexist with new joys. Sometimes, after dinner, Jack would sit on the floor with the dogs and talk quietly about Shadow. He'd tell stories about long-ago chases through the desert, about all the lives Shadow had touched, about the way love leaves a mark that never fades. Sierra listened, her eyes steady. Remy and Luna nuzzled close, the rhythm of their breathing calm and sure. Jack's voice, once so shaky, was strong now, not unbroken, but honest. He realized, bit by bit, that rescue had never been a one-way street. He'd set out thinking he was saving them, that his act of compassion would give Sierra and her pups a second chance. But the truth was, they had saved him in return. They had taught him to risk his heart again, to accept the messiness of love, to embrace the connections that could never be planned or forced. They'd made him see that even the deepest wounds were not a sentence, only a starting point for something new. The changes rippled out into the neighborhood. People who'd once kept their distance stopped to chat, drawn by the dog's playful energy and Jack's newfound openness. The local shelter reported an uptick in adoptions and volunteer applications, inspired by Jack's story. More than once, a neighbor confessed that seeing Jack with Sierra, Remy, and Luna had convinced them to foster a senior dog or take in a stray kitten. On a warm evening in early fall, Jack hosted a small backyard picnic. He grilled burgers, poured lemonade, and invited the shelter staff, the neighbors who'd reached out, and the families whose kids now called his yard their playground. Laughter filled the air. Children tossed balls for Remy and Luna. Sierra lay content among a crowd of admirers, her scars now badges of honor rather than shame. Under the soft glow of string lights, Jack looked around at the people and dogs gathered in his yard and felt, for the first time in years, that he belonged. Later, after everyone left and the house was quiet, Jack sat on the porch with Sierra at his side, Remy and Luna asleep at his feet. He stared at the stars, his heart full. He thought about the meaning of rescue, about the way love and courage could stitch the broken places together, about the family he'd built, one choice, one risk, one act of hope at a time. He knew there would be hard days ahead. Life was never safe, never easy. But now he understood. The greatest rescues were always mutual. The act of opening your heart, of letting yourself care, changed not just one life, but many. Love and compassion, freely given, always returned, sometimes in ways you could never have imagined. Months passed, and Jack Monroe's house became a living testament to the power of second chances. The sharp edges of grief wore down into something softer, memory transformed by the day-to-day rhythms of Sierra, Remy, and Luna. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window as Luna bounced at Jack's heels, Remy waiting patiently for his share of breakfast, Sierra's watchful eyes tracking every movement. Gone was the hollow silence that had haunted the rooms for so long. In its place was music, barking, laughter, the shuffle of children's sneakers across the porch. Jack's backyard, once a lonely patch of brittle grass and cacti, turned into a neighborhood haven. Sierra lounged in the shade, her scars a gentle reminder of battles survived, her gaze soft as children circled her with balls and sticks. Luna became the self-appointed ambassador, greeting each visitor, be it neighbor, postal worker, or new rescue, with enthusiastic spins and toothy grins. Remy, still the cautious one, found courage in his new tribe, wagging his tail at every kind hand, learning trust one gentle touch at a time. Word of their story kept growing, moving beyond the boundaries of Scottsdale. The shelter ran a follow-up in the local paper, a second chance for a cop, and 3 lives changed forever. A TV news crew stopped by, filming Jack as he walked the dogs along the sun-drenched sidewalks, his eyes squinting against the bright desert light, a rare smile tugging at his lips. People from across the city wrote letters, some sharing stories of their own rescues, others sending thanks for the hope Jack's family inspired. But the greatest change unfolded quietly, in everyday moments. Jack noticed how his neighbors lingered longer in conversation, how they asked after Sierra's health or pressed treats into his hand for the puppies. He found himself offering advice to new foster parents, sharing lessons learned the hard way. And as the seasons turned, Jack realized the ripple effect had touched every corner of the community. More pets found homes, more hands reached out to help, more people saw the value in every life, no matter how broken it once seemed. The shelter's adoption days became community events. On the anniversary of Sierra's rescue, Jack was invited to speak. He stood in the shelter's small, bright yard, Sierra at his side, Remy and Luna tumbling in the grass behind him. Faces from every part of his story watched and listened. Janine and Marco from the rescue team, neighbors who'd left gifts at his door, the children who'd befriended his dogs, and shelter staff who had become like family. Jack cleared his throat, heart thumping with nerves, but when he spoke, his voice was steady, honest, even strong. A year ago, I thought I was saving 3 dogs, but the truth is, they saved me right back. They gave me a reason to hope again. They reminded me that healing isn't a solo act. It takes a village, sometimes just a single moment of courage to reach out, to say yes, even when you're scared. He glanced down at Sierra, who leaned into his leg, steady as ever. Every life is worth saving, and every act of kindness, big or small, can change a life. Sometimes it can change a whole neighborhood. As he finished, applause rippled through the crowd, laughter and even a few tears. Jack looked out and saw what had grown from the ashes of his sorrow. Not just a family, but a network of hearts, all bound by the simple act of caring. Later that evening, Jack hosted a backyard gathering, an open invitation for anyone who'd been touched by the story. Elderly neighbors brought homemade lemonade. Kids tumbled with the dogs, shrieking with joy. Sierra became a calming presence for newly rescued animals brought to meet her, her gentle nuzzles and slow tail wags easing their nerves. Even people who had never owned pets before found themselves drawn to the backyard, drawn by the spirit of acceptance and belonging. As dusk settled, Jack sat on the steps with Remy asleep beside him, Luna sprawled at his feet, Sierra watching over them all. He listened to the laughter drifting across the yard, the calls of good night from neighbors, the satisfied sighs of his little family. For a moment, he closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of desert rain, cut grass, and warm fur. He felt the weight of the past, the ache that would never fully leave, but now it lived alongside gratitude, a heart stretched wide by love. He thought about the lessons Sierra and her puppies had given him, a truth he wanted everyone to carry. Rescue is never just about saving someone else. It's about letting yourself be changed in return. It's about connection. Messy, unpredictable, beautiful, and the courage to say yes to something new, even when you're scared. The final words he'd shared at the shelter echoed in his mind. Every dog has a story, but some stories rewrite yours. As the stars blinked on above his backyard, Jack realized that legacy wasn't something you left behind. It was something you built day by day in every act of care. The power of hope and connection was real, and lasting change started with a single, vulnerable yes. In a world so often divided and distracted, Jack's family was living proof that small acts of courage, repeated and shared, could light up a whole community. And so their story went on, written in paw prints, laughter, and the countless lives changed by one rescued family. A lesson for all: compassion breeds compassion. No being is ever truly lost as long as someone is willing to care.